Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio News, and it's our weekly roundup of some of the stories making headlines this week. Joining me at the table, Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio. Welcome back, Peter.
Hi, Bill.
Good to have you with us. We're coming
Nice
in on the end of 2014, and let's just talk about some of the stories that you've been working on at IPR over the past couple of weeks. You know, there's one that's gotten attention for the last several months. We're not thinking about it a lot in the winter, but it's definitely on the radar for city leaders in Traverse City, and that's summer and summer festivals. Take me back to how you kind of jumped onto this story, because this was something that our local Associated Press reporter had done. It got some national attention, and take it from there.
Right. So if you go back to Labor Day weekend, there was a music festival down at the waterfront, and it was perceived to be quite loud. And I think everyone agrees that it was actually not any louder than any other event that occurs at the open space. But since Labor Day is kind of the season's over or winding down, it's more quiet. There's less white noise to kind of obscure it. So it was seen as this obscenely loud event by many people, you know, who live in the vicinity of the open space. So a number, I don't know, maybe 25 people came. I didn't count. Just about an hour and a half of complaining that the commission heard then a few weeks after that, late September, I think. And then here comes the issue again. And frankly, when I saw this, I thought, oh, again, we're going to have, I mean, I think we've had this debate 2 times now in the last 5 years.
Not a highly unusual conversation to have.
Yeah, it's just kind of an ongoing, it's a perennial issue in Traverse City. But then John Flesher, who is the AP reporter who sometimes is on this show, he wrote a really nice article that he sort of put it in the context of Michigan's economy's in the toilet. Everyone in Michigan is trying to figure out what's the future for Michigan. And here's this town where they have an abundance of success, and they're tired of it. And so that caught people's attention nationwide, and it went viral, as we say today. And somewhere in there, the term festival fatigue was coined. I'm not sure.
Maybe John coined that phrase.
I don't know who you first used that, but festival fatigue. So then I get an email from the editor that I deal with if I file a story for NPR, meaning it's not just on our regional air, but is on the national air. Generally, the communications, I go to them when I think we have a story that would be of interest nationwide, and it's pretty unusual for them to come to me. But in this case, the editor had contacted, an editor at the national desk in Washington had contacted my editor in Cleveland and said, hey, what about this? And so they were interested in the story because of the attention it was getting. And as I've said to people, I would have never thought in a million years to pitch this to NPR. I thought, oh, this is, you know, we have this conversation all the time. It's not particularly newsworthy. And in some senses, it is sort of a classic tourist town story. You have enough success, and the locals say, "Okay, that's good. Why don't we close the doors now and draw a line here?" And that's a lot of what's going on. So then, but I didn't know how to do the story, because once late October hits, there's not a lot going on. So, but then it kicked up. The city manager brought forward a recommendation of new noise limits. Rules about trash, increasing the fees quite substantially, and brought them to the city commissioners. And at that point, the business community really turned out, you know, the people representing resort type interests, and said, you really got to be careful. I mean, it's been 10 years of just one success after another for Traverse City as a destination. I mean, hardly a month goes by where the town doesn't end up on some list of the greatest this or the best that, and all that adds up. And their fear, with I guess some justification, is that a different message starts going out, that maybe the people in Traverse City have had enough of you visitors, and maybe you need to start looking elsewhere for the next best thing.
Oh, there's so many offshoots from that I get to in my mind. But let me start with just when you got the call from NPR, your first reaction was, Are you serious?
Yeah, I was a little surprised, and then I couldn't figure out how to do it. And then when I said, okay, well, it's come back up. There was a meeting. It's live again now. Then I spoke with my editor, and then he's telling me I have to nationalize the story. That all of a sudden I'm in the position where I have to defend this thing, even though they had come to me to do the story, and because it is sort of a hyper-local story in a sense, and a common one, not in my backyard. And so then I started looking around and I tried to figure out, okay, what's the theme here that is sort of new? And so then I kind of settled in on the festival trend. And when you get to thinking about it, it is festivals that are the new big trend in tourism promotion. I mean, Traverse City has always been in the festival business, or for almost 100 years. With the Cherry Festival, I think dates back to the 1920s. So that has long been a strategy of places, but in the last 10 years or so, it's just exploded, and everybody's having, there's almost more festivals than there are days in Traverse City. And many places have been very successful at this. If you think of like the Aspen Ideas Festival, the Sundance Festival in Park City, Utah. These things, the name of the town becomes synonymous with an event that people want to go to. And I spoke with a professor down at Michigan State University, and he was pointing out all these festivals to me. And the one that made it into my report is another example of towns trying to retool was in Caseville in the Thumb. It's a port town, and they have a pretty nice beach there, and it's an attraction. But I think in general, the east side of the state has trouble competing with the west side of the state in terms of beaches. I mean, the beaches on Lake Michigan are dazzling compared to the Lake Huron on Michigan shores. And Caseville was also a big salmon port. I mean, there was a lot of salmon fishing that was done out of there, and salmon fishing has pretty much gone bye-bye in Lake Huron. And so they needed something new, but they had developed this festival, I think around '99, called the Cheeseburgers in Caseville. and the first year they did it, they had 5,000 people show up, and it's a town of less than 1,000, I want to say, 800 people. And 5,000 people came to eat cheeseburgers. Today, it's a 10-day festival, and last year they sold in the neighborhood of 300,000 cheeseburgers. And they estimate 200,000 people come. I did not use the visitor estimate in my piece because it's a little squishy. They're counting events. How many people are at this parade? How many people are at this? People, yeah. I don't know. Those numbers I thought were a little less trustworthy. But you got to count how many hamburger patties you make and cook, and they say they sold 300,000, and I thought that was pretty amazing. Wow. So it's a very real trend, and it has great value. And if you look at someone like Sam Porter at Porterhouse Productions in Traverse City, he makes a very good argument that especially the smaller festivals are really a way to bring people up, to kind of showcase what's going on in a community, for people to tap in to culture and the sort of the vibe. Not just I think people just less and less, they just want to show up and get a motel and go to the beach. I mean, there's still a lot of people that want to do that, but people are looking, they want to do something, and they want to sort of connect to a place in a way that feels authentic, like they're really a part of it. And so if you go to an event, I think it's sort of ready-made. And then the other thing that Dan McCole, this researcher and professor down at MSU, was pointing out is they really fit with the way we travel, because Americans are insanely busy. He referenced an article that had come out recently that showed of all the developed Western countries, Americans leave on the table more vacation days than any other. We just don't use them because we're just too busy. So the pattern that he sees is that we try and pack a lot in short amounts of time, and so the weekend trip to the festival is something you can kind of peg. You're less likely to cancel it. It's sort of ready-made for you to show up and have a great time, and you don't have to do all the hard work of figuring out what are we going to do when we go. It's laid out for you. So I think there's a lot of reasons that festivals are going to be here to stay for a while, and cities like Traverse City need to figure out how to deal with them.
I wanted, it's been a little while since we had John Flesher in here. I want to ask him next time, but it almost seems to me like this was a story that, and no discredit to John, but it almost seems like something that he could have just written on the couch on a Saturday afternoon, like, oh, we're tired of festivals. This is an argument we're having. Here's my story for the week. I mean, it was just such a natural part of our livelihood. Like you had said a minute ago, we've been talking about it for a long time.
Right.
So this wasn't a big surprise.
Right.
But it also seems like while this was a discussion that the city was having, the article and the attention almost stoked the fire. The fact that all of a sudden it got picked up everywhere and everybody started talking about it.
Right.
It kind of forced the city to even go further than maybe they were planning to. I don't know.
Perhaps, and that was what really, and it really unnerved the visitor industry. And Brad Van Domelen spoke quite forcefully at that meeting that you really want to be careful about the headlines you're generating, and if people through this kind of reporting start to get the sense that tourists are not wanted, are kind of, fudgy is the term we've long used to that captures the ambivalence that we have toward tourists, right?
Right.
It's kind of a pejorative, but it while signifying they're here buying things and spending money in our communities and making local businesses, allowing them to exist and to thrive. So we call them fudgies. And so Brad Van Domelen was trying to urge the commission to see that there's something at stake in the conversation and the tone of it and how protracted it is and so forth.
So is the city, the city commission has created this ad hoc committee now. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you view that as passing the buck on to someone else to make the decision, but it strikes me that we've got an issue of whether it's the city commission that's got an issue or it's the 10 residents who live closest and were most annoyed with the noise that have the issue. It's hard to say, but that ad hoc committee now will make a recommendation to the full commission. So it's really up to 3 people to launch the next step.
Right. I thought they did a good job picking the ad hoc committee, because if my read on it was, I think two of the two commissioners who expressed the most skepticism about the proposed rules were Tim Werner and Gary Howe. And Gary was appointed. And the commissioner who expressed the most consternation about what was going on was Barbara Boudros, who made some very pointed comments about tourists trashing our town and polluting the bay and these things. And then Ross Richardson, who was actually, he was at the first meeting in September when it was almost entirely people complaining about noise. Ross was among them. He spoke in a more measured way, so he seemed to be kind of occupying a middle zone. And those were the 3 that were appointed to the ad hoc committee. And I thought that was a judicious selection. It was done pretty quickly, but those 3 were put on. It seemed like a good representative group to throw the problem to. I don't know how well, I don't know what can be done. I mean, some people are going to be unhappy either way, I think. It's a political issue, and some choices are going to have to be made. I think we have a view in our society that if we just have more information or more technology, we can always come up with solutions to everything that'll make everyone happy. And the reality is that's not the case. Although if you talk to Sam Porter, he would say you can. If the festivals are managed correctly, cited the right way, if the space is used effectively, that you could satisfy everybody down there, and you could have a lot of festivals and they wouldn't be disruptive, and people wouldn't feel like the open space is closed throughout the entire summer. He would make that case, and maybe this ad hoc committee can figure that out. Maybe they can figure out the things that they have to do that will, satisfy most people. I can't help but notice that it really appears to be a generational issue. I mean, if you look at the people who are the most unhappy with this, they tend to be older folks who've been here a long time and don't feel that this is necessary, that all these events are needed. And if you look at the people who are speaking in favor of this and who are skeptical on the commissioners who are skeptical of these rules, it tends to be younger people who I think they see, this is how they see Traverse City more. I mean, I know my children, this is what they just think of Traverse City as a place where there are festivals all the time because that's all they've ever known.
Right, that makes sense. Last point on this, and I'll be interested in seeing whether to what lengths this ad hoc group goes, whether they're just going to focus on these potential rule changes and fines, or whether they will look at other solutions. Like you said, I've seen comments, letters to the editor where, surely we can find a space for festivals. So is there another place in Traverse City that we can designate as a festival grounds?
Yeah.
Other communities have designated festival space. Probably a bad example, but Milwaukee, size relatively is a bad example, but Milwaukee has a spot on the waterfront that's a festival space.
Yeah.
And people know it as the festival grounds. I mean, that's all they do there. So it just begs the question, there's got to be, somebody along the lines has got to make some suggestions for alternatives. And I don't know if that's, I guess, A, if that's Sam Porter, for example, and B, whether he will be heard or whether he will be viewed as the guy that wants to
Make
have
a
it
buck.
all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to imagine Traverse City, a consensus developing where we embrace the open space as the festival grounds. Although somebody in the course of this, it might have been my wife, pointed out to me that the open space is not really somewhere you go. I mean, maybe you fly a kite down there, but generally, if you go down to the waterfront, you go to the beach. You don't want to sit on a patch of grass on with rails. I mean, you do walk through there. It is an interesting walk around, and you can go out on the piers. But it's not as though a lot of people are congregating on the open space where the festivals are concentrated when there's nothing there.
And it wasn't that long ago where we had a big coal plant. And 10 years ago, we had a huge factory building that got torn down that was there. So there's not a 100-year history of people having that as sacred open space.
That's
literally.
true,
I mean,
too.
there was a lot of other stuff going on.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's shift gears. We've talked a long time about this one. But you mentioned fudgies, so that brings up the thought of Mackinac Island to me, and you've covered that developing story about whether or not we were going to get some new hotels up there on Mackinac Island, what it would do to change the culture and the visibility and how the town looks historically. So give us the latest on that.
Well, I'm afraid the latest is I was incorrect in some things I said last time I was on your show because I was about to do some reporting on where things were and I hadn't looked fully into the matter as it stood then and stands today.
Okay.
So a group called Main Dock Inn, which is primarily two people who have purchased land that was owned by the Arnold Line ferry company. It's the open space right in front of the Arnold Line dock, and they have proposed building a hotel there that would fill in that space, and people disembarking from Arnold Line would actually walk underneath their hotel. There would be rooms up above. So there have been a few iterations of this proposal, and some of them involve demolishing historic buildings. And I think I stated that their current proposal, that was the issue currently. Their current proposal does not propose that. There was this past January, new rules were put in place regarding historic structures. You now are not able to just demolish a historic building because you want it out of the way. The city, through its Historic District Commission, has something to say about that. And I think I was also incorrect in stating that the loss of open space was not at issue here. And I wasn't entirely clear if the Historic District Commission had the ability to reject plans to build something because open space would be lost. But in fact, That is exactly what is going on. The Historic District Commission told Maine Dock Inn that filling in that space, which is, if you are familiar with the island, you get off the Arnold Line, you walk up, there are bikes being rented there, but you walk through this, between these buildings up to Main Street, and then there's actually kind of a greenway or park land that goes up to Market Street. And so there's this sort of runway where you get a classic view of the ferry buildings, and there's sort of a warehouse building, there's a ticketing counter in there, and the architect who does the work on this for the island, in his review of this, said essentially you would cut off this historic view that's the quintessential experience of visiting or living on an island, is a view of a ferry complex like that. And he refers to it as the only such ferry complex on the island. I'm not sure, I mean, Shepler's has a dock, but they don't have those buildings that have quite that appearance. So that's the main reason, to my read of the review, the main reason that they denied Maine Dock Inn the ability, they rejected their proposal to build this hotel. It's now going to appeal, and that was scheduled for next week, but now it's been put off, I think, until March, and it will be appealed to, down in Lansing, the State Historic Preservation Office puts together a panel, and lawyers for each side will make their case about the rightness or wrongness of the different arguments.
So it's feasible there could be a decision in March? I mean, it's still get under construction technically?
No, it's hard to imagine this would move that quickly. So the appeal panel they could overrule the island. They could say the city got this wrong. You need to issue them a permit. They could uphold it. They could remand it, say reconsider it based on these points. It seems pretty possible that this will end up in court. I mean, once that appeal has been heard, if a party is not satisfied, then you would go to court. I'm not sure if the city would be able to. I mean, if the appeal panel tells the island that they got this wrong and they need to give a permit to Maine Dock Inn, then I think that would be the end of the matter.
Well, it raises all kinds of questions about, what's the point of having a city government approve or deny a permit if a developer can just go over their heads and get one anyway?
Right.
And vice versa. What's the point of applying for it if the city can just say no?
Right.
Either way, it's going to raise.
But there has to be some due process. I mean, you need recourse to be. We can't solely be at the mercy of one panel on the island. So we have processes where people can appeal others' decisions and they can be reviewed, and that's what's happening. And then if they go to the courts, there's a whole set of questions of whether that's a separate branch of government, right? And when is it appropriate for the courts to step into administrative action of the state and say, no, you've violated the rights of this business by not allowing them to build their hotel. Yeah.
We've got just a couple minutes left. Let's try to go through some of the other stories as quickly as we can here. If you want to take 60 seconds, you've got a development with the fracking issue here in northern Michigan, and a land lease that's making news this week, right?
Right, and people may have read quite a bit about what's been going on in Kalkaska County in the upper waters of the Manistee River watershed, and some concern about the number of wells that are being drilled or proposed, the amount of water needed to frack those wells. We're talking about fracking, this controversial method of drilling for oil and gas very far underground, nearly 2 miles beneath the surface of the earth. So the company drilling those wells is Encana. Now they, in October, leased a number of acres around the Osabo River and in a stretch known as the Holy Waters for its very pristine appearance and its trout fishing. And this is the stretch below Grayling, so that where the river flows east out of Grayling. They've leased the mineral rights on well, I'm not going to say the number of acres, but a number of parcels of land. And groups like Anglers of the Osabo, the City of Grayling, but mostly conservation groups, the Sierra Club, Michigan Environmental Council, are saying, whoa, this is one of our prized pieces of heritage. Don't let them go in there and drill. And so they're asking the director to not approve these leases. Even though they were auctioned in October, the director has to approve them, and they're asking him to not do that.
And that's coming up
Today. Yeah.
All right. And let's close out. You mentioned the trout streams. The trout numbers is another story that you're working on, a rebound of sorts for
right, and these are lake trout, which are the big predators in the Great Lakes. For almost 50 years now, the federal government has been putting lake trout into Lakes Michigan and Huron, hoping to reestablish the fish that it was the lion in the jungle in the Great Lakes before lamprey came. And there have been a number of problems that would take more than 60 seconds to go into. But to put it in perspective, in Lake Huron, they have put almost 100 million lake trout, born in hatcheries and planted into the lakes since 1972. This is a major effort to reestablish a fish species. And for most of that time, it was an absolute failure. And now, because of some changes in the lake, primarily the disappearance of a little prey fish called alewives, the lake trout are able to reproduce. And so in Lake Huron, you now are, as a biologist told me last month, they have arrived at the point where stocking is becoming redundant and really unnecessary in most of the lake. And the same thing is starting to happen in Lake Michigan, though it's farther behind, but they're starting to see the same changes in the ecology of the lake to where this big native predator is coming back, is starting to reproduce. Because what they could never do, there were never any wild fish in the lake. They could never reproduce. All their young would die. And the reasons for that have to do with the diet of alewives and a vitamin deficiency that results when they eat alewives. So with alewives moving out of the lakes because of the changing nature of the food web, lake trout are now sort of returning to that top level in the food web, which could have really significant implications for the lakes in the future and the kind of the resiliency of the ecosystem. I mean, for scientists, it's an extraordinarily exciting development.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, we are already out of time, and I want to thank Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio. Peter, thanks for being with us and filling the time with great stuff. Always
my pleasure.
Good to have you in. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio News, and we appreciate you joining us for the Briefing Room. We'll see you again next time right here.